I talked to the producer for the call-in radio talk show I was supposed to do on 9/11. He said he'd call me back to reschedule. It took a few months until things got back to somewhat normal, but you knew somebody in the Middle East is going to pay for this, and justifiably so. Meanwhile, Ed Fisher, who was once the mayor of Philadelphia and who wanted to bring riverboat casino gambling to the banks of the Delaware, has thrown in his hat for governor of the state of Pennsylvania. The first thing on his agenda if he becomes governor is to legalize casino gambling throughout the state. He's pitching that the gaming tax revenues will save the floundering horse racing industry and eliminate property tax for all seniors. It wasn't long after that when I got a call from the radio talk show producer. They want me to come in that week to talk about my book. I got to the radio station a half hour early. The producer takes me into the studio. He introduces me to the host of the show, a guy they call Terrible Herb. He told me he loved my book and can't wait to talk about what I've written on the show. I took a seat across from him. He handed me headphones. I put them on. I never did anything like this before, but I wasn't nervous. If anything, I was anxious to tell my story. He opened up the show by introducing me and talked a little about my book. It didn't take long before the call board lit up with calls. Most of the callers, even the ones who patronized Atlantic City casinos, agreed with me that having casinos in our backyards that are open 24/7 is going to be a problem for many Pennsylvanians. Then there were those who called in and brought up the personal responsibility card. They're the ones who believe they're amongst the majority of those gambling in casinos. If they lose or win a certain amount of money, that's it. They're done. I explained to Terrible Herb and his listeners how I understood where they're coming from, because I can say the same thing about myself when it comes to alcohol and drugs. I went on to say how there was once a time when you'd bring up the personal responsibility card to those inflicted with those addictions, and you'd be embarrassed if a family member was an alcoholic or drug addict. But that came to an end back in the 80s when the AMA, American Medical Association, declared those types of addictions a disease. Compulsive gambling may or may not be a disease, but it's definitely the most expensive addiction. I told this one caller if an alcoholic or drug addict spent on their high what a gambler does in minutes on theirs, they'd OD. One caller asked why the AMA hasn't made compulsive gambling a disease. I told him unlike alcohol and drugs, where most of us have had loved ones afflicted with those disorders, especially drugs going back to those hippie days in the late 60s when the youth of America started getting high for entertainment, the compulsive gambling epidemic is in its early stages. But with the expansion of casino gambling throughout the country and soon here in our state, it won't be long before compulsive gambling becomes a disease. Richie, are you saying is casino gambling is the same as getting high with booze and drugs? Terrible Herb asked. It was for me and a lot of others, I said. And watch what happens here in our state when casino gambling becomes legal. You're going to see Pennsylvanians, especially seniors, in our casinos day and night. They'll be cashing in their Social Security checks and getting high on gambling. While that's happening, their loved ones will be happy knowing mom and dad are enjoying their golden years. That is, until they have to move in with them. A woman caller asked why you don't hear more stories like the one I've written. I told her because unlike alcoholics and drug addicts, compulsive gamblers, especially casino ones, can't come out of the closet and tell their stories because their skeletons are more incriminating with things like tax evasion, embezzlement, larceny, insurance fraud, arson, and in some cases murder. Believe me when I tell you, I said, gambling, especially casino gambling, is the most expensive addiction, and one that many state lawmakers will condone in order to fill state tax gambling coffers. Before I got off the line with her, I said, when a compulsive gambler comes to rob you, they won't be slurring their words or staggering. You'll never see it coming. I was told it was going to an hour-long show, but the calls kept coming in. It ended up over 2 hours. Before I left, Terrible Herb told me it was a great show and hopes to have me back soon. Then we took a picture together and he gave me a cassette with the recorded show on it. The following week, I got a call from a TV producer from one of the news stations here in Philly. They want me to come in to talk about my book. Before doing that show, I launched my website. I ordered another 100 books. I did the show, and before it ended, I gave out my website address so people could order the book. I sold over 60 books that week. Right after doing that TV show, I started getting calls from radio, TV news stations, and newspaper reporters throughout Pennsylvania. Before 2001 ended, I did a few more TV news, radio shows, and I had stories written up about me in news publications throughout the state. It wasn't because of interest in my book. It was because people wanted to hear my opinion on what's going to happen if Pennsylvania gets casinos. In November of that year, Ed Fisher was elected governor of the state of Pennsylvania. In March of 2003, the Iraqi War officially began, and Pennsylvania legislators put forth Act 71. If passed, this legislation will legalize casino gambling throughout Pennsylvania. It wasn't long after that when I got a call from a Pennsylvania House representative named Paul Kimber. He heard me on the radio, saw me on TV, and read articles about me. He asked me if I would like to testify at the first gaming hearing that's being held in Philadelphia on Monday, May 5th. That's the week Raymond and Sharon are getting married. I told him I would, and he said he's going to send me a copy of Act 71 along with information of who else is going to be testifying at the hearing. I received an email from and Representative Kimber with Act 71 and other information on who's going to be there, along with what the Gaming Oversight Committee that he's a member of is going to be addressing. What I learned after reading through all the mumbo-jumbo legal talk is that the first phase of casino gambling in Pennsylvania will be slot parlors at 14 locations. That made sense to me because it will take no time to get these joints up and running. And that's what the state wants to do when receiving 55% on gross revenues collected from slots. That's 55 cents from every dollar patrons lose filling state tax gaming coffers. That, along with them not being full-blown casinos like you have in Atlantic City, makes it easier to get the support needed from the public in order for our pro-gaming state legislators to pass Act 71. But I know, and so does our legislators who supported this legislation, that it wouldn't be long before the slot parlors become full-blown casinos. I got to the hearing and the room was packed with TV and other news media outlets, gaming lobbyists, civic and religious leaders. There's tables set up where members from the Gaming Oversight Committee are sitting. Representative Kimber gets up from the table and comes over to where I'm sitting. He introduced himself. He said my safeguards were an eye-opener and he shared them with other members on the committee. Many of them agreed they should be in our gaming law, especially the monthly statement one. He told me he's going to call on me to speak right after the chairman of the Gaming Control Board, Gregory Lipton, gives his presentation. After all the introductions, the hearing started. For almost an hour, the chairman of the Gaming Board gave all the upsides of having casinos in Pennsylvania. From the tax revenues that are going to eliminate property tax for seniors, saving the horse racing industry, and bringing good-paying jobs to the Commonwealth. The more he talked, the more I realized how clueless this guy is on how casinos operate. He ended his presentation by bringing up Governor Fisher's favorite line on how Pennsylvania is losing all that gaming tax revenue to the casinos of Atlantic City, New Jersey. Afterwards, he took some questions from the representatives on the Oversight Committee. One was how the Gaming Control Board is going to address the casino compulsive gambling problem. The chairman answered with the 24-hour 1-800-GAMBLER helpline number on signs that will be installed where patrons can see them throughout the casinos, and a self-exclusion program that allows individuals with a gambling problem to voluntarily ban themselves from casinos. Chairman Lipton left and I took a seat. Representative Kimber introduced me as a gaming activist and author of the book, The Last Buy-In. I thanked him for inviting me to speak, and then I said, before I get started, I want to get one thing straight here. I'm not a gaming activist, I'm a casino gambling degenerate. And unlike the gentleman who spoke before me, along with many of you in this room, what I'm about to say comes from true-life casino gambling experiences. After that, you could hear a pin drop. Everyone's eyes were on me, and so were the media cameras. So I told my casino story. After I finished, I read out loud my 7 safeguards that should be put in our gaming bill in order to prevent our casino operators from breeding compulsive gambling degenerates like me. My first safeguard, I said, is not to have our casinos open 24/7. I've gambled in casinos during those early morning hours, and that's when you'll see pathological gambling in full bloom. My second safeguard is no free booze for those gambling. What other industry is allowed to serve you free booze while doing business? Can you imagine when buying a home, car, or borrow money from a bank and they're serving you free booze during the transaction? My third safeguard is no cashing personal, payroll, travelers, or third-party checks, and no credit card cash advancements. My fourth safeguard is no ATM machines on the casino floor. Why make it easy for the compulsive gamblers to feed their addiction? My fifth safeguard is no interest-free credit. The reason casinos don't charge interest is because they're not giving you cash. They're giving you chips and slot credits that eventually you're going to lose, and now you owe the casinos real money. Even the few who do win when playing with credit are most likely hook and will be back to try to win more. My number 6 safeguard is no comping. The comps make casino gamblers justify their losses. In other words, when they lose thousands of dollars, they'll deduct the value of the comps they received and the loss won't feel so bad. Comps are the syringe the gaming industry uses to deliver their drug. My seventh safeguard is to make our casinos mail out monthly statements to the 90% or more of casino patrons who will be enrolled in casino reward card programs. These programs track casino patrons' play with comp cards. So being this system is already in place, how about making our casino operators mail those patrons monthly statements, showing them their wins, losses, along with the amount of time they gambled? Again, you could hear a pin drop, so I said, now here's the sad part about my 7 safeguards. No casino operator would open a casino in Pennsylvania under those conditions. And those of you who want to bring casinos to Pennsylvania know that, and that's why you'll never put them in our gaming bill. None of the oversight committee members asked me a question, which didn't surprise me. I'm sure they had no idea what I was talking about. I got out of my seat, and as I'm leaving the room, a reporter from a TV station in Pittsburgh stopped me. He told me they're going to air the hearing and my testimony tonight. He asked if he could interview me. I spent over a half hour with him and his crew. As I was leaving the building, I heard my name called out. I turned around and saw Representative Kimber. He thanked me for coming, and he asked me to help him write legislation to put forth this voting session that will make casinos send monthly statements.